Hi guys, if you want to study the spinal cord tracts but do not go into the details of all those things, then this is the best resource for you. Let's start with the starting point. Remember that the brainstem has got different parts. Here is the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. Above that is the diencephalon, which contains the thalamus. Further higher up is the cerebral cortex. This is the midline. And coming lower down, you can see the spinal cord. I have roughly represented the upper limb region and the lower limb region here. Now, we are going to talk about the three major spinal cord tracts. Let us start from the motor tract. Corticospinal tract is a motor tract. It starts from the motor cortex or the precentral gyrus and goes down to the spinal cord. That's why it is called the corticospinal tract. Two things to note here. Most of the fibers forming the corticospinal tract will cross to the opposite side in the lower medulla. When it crosses, it forms the so-called lateral corticospinal tract, which will go down and end in the anterior horn cell of the spinal cord, then giving rise to the motor neurons in your peripheral nerves. Whereas 10 to 15% of the fibers, see here, they do not cross in the medulla. Instead, they come down, go to the respective segment of the spinal cord, but before terminating, they divide into two sets and terminate on each side of the spinal cord, thereby giving a bilateral innervation. That is the uncrossed anterior corticospinal tract. Let's see that in animation. You can see how they come, they cross and go down to the spinal cord. Now the fibers that come from the brain or the cortex coming all the way to the spinal cord, terminating in the anterior horn cell. This is called the upper motor neuron, whereas the anterior horn cell gives rise to the motor neurons running in your peripheral nerve. This is called the lower motor neuron. The functions and the clinical significance of the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neurons are completely different. The next tract is the easiest one. That's the spinothalamic tract. As the name says, it starts from the spinal cord, goes to the thalamus. This is a sensory tract or ascending tract because it starts from the spinal cord and goes up to the brain. These sensory tracts have three sets of neurons. The first is called the first order neuron, second is second order neuron, third is the third order neuron here. The common facts are the second order neuron will always cross the midline. You can see that it's crossing the midline. The second order neuron will always end in the thalamus. You can see that it's stopping in the thalamus. Then the third order neuron will go to the cerebral cortex. Now specific to the spinothalamic tract, the first order neuron is nothing but the one you see in the dorsal root ganglion. From there, the neurons end in the posterior horn of the spinal cord. The second order neurons immediately cross at the same segment of the spinal cord. See, that is more important. It then ascends, runs all the way to the top to the same side thalamus, then terminating in the same side cerebral cortex. So this crossing is important. It is in the same level, immediately they enter the spinal cord. However, the other set of the sensory tract is the dorsal column tracts. Okay, so it's called dorsal column tract because it's more posterior in the spinal cord. First order neurons entering the spinal cord in this dorsal column tract, the blue color one, it runs all the way to the medulla. The second order neurons are formed in the medulla that crosses the midline. Then as usual they go to the thalamus from where it will be projected to the cerebral cortex. So the difference between spinothalamic tract and the dorsal column tract is one crosses immediately, one crosses much later in the medulla. Also in the dorsal column tracts, it's plural. We have two tracts, one coming from the lower limb called the fasciculus gracilis or the gracile tract, one coming from the upper limb placed laterally, that's called the cuneate tract or the fasciculus cuneatus. But after crossing in the medulla, they both form a common bundle called medial lemniscus. Let's put all the tracts together. This is how it looks like. So with the help of this one picture, you can explain all the three major tracts of the spinal cord. You can even animate them and see how they are going with respect to the proximal distal relations and also the right and the left relations.